Welcome back to the channel, everybody. Captain C.A. Richardson here, and today we're doing a deep dive. In fact, this is a full course from FlatsClass University. We're going to talk all about choosing the perfect inshore rod for every situation. That's right, we're going to talk length, power, action, and it's going to relate to cover, scenario, even species. So, if you've ever been confused about what rod you should be using, well, this class is for you. So let's go down to my studio and talk about it. Come on. Okay, ready to get started out of the wind. That is why we're not fishing today. Small craft advisory, so we're learning about inshore rods. Now, there are three terms that you need to familiarize yourself with when we talk about inshore rods, and that is rod length, rod power, and rod action, like I've written on the board behind me. All right, first, let's tackle rod length. This is an easy one because I'm going to put it into two categories. You're either that group that likes to throw those rods that are in the mid 6 foot range up to about 7'2", or you're one of those anglers that likes to throw those rods from maybe 7'3" all the way up to 7'10". Now, those shorter rods for sure are more accurate. They're more sensitive and they're definitely less fatiguing. The longer rods, well, they are heavier, but they do afford you a little longer cast or better casting distance. And they're also going to give you a little bit more leverage when you're fighting fish. They're also going to enhance your ability to set the hook because you can move so much more line in a single stroke. So you can see where these two camps, it's a balancing act. And you're gonna see where I like to ride that line in between the short rods and the long rods, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But let's go to power next, rod power. For me, this is the ability for the rod to handle a certain lure weight, okay, a certain type of lure. It also relates to the fact that what type of fish are you fighting? Are you fishing for speckled trout or are you fishing for snook? I mean, that's a big difference when you choose the power of the rod. And then you also have to consider the scenario, the cover that you're fishing. Let me give you some examples. Let's just say it's the dead of winter and you're fishing skinny negative tide lows and you're focusing on potholes or oyster bar troughs and things like that with little tiny Ned rigs. Well, the power of that rod is going to be, well, probably a medium light to a medium rod because A, you're throwing much smaller lures. Generally speaking, because you're not fishing around a lot of cover and it's more open, whether that be potholes or the bar's exposed so they're going to run over the mud or whatever, you don't have a lot of hazards to negotiate, so medium light, medium works again. And then the size of the fish would have to be considered, but let's face it, most of the fish that we catch are somewhere between 1.5 pounds and about 6 pounds. And that's everybody, including myself. I mean, that's the majority of the fish that you're catching. So you can get away with a rod such as that. But let's change it and talk about, okay, now it's summertime and you're fishing a big swim bait around docks or maybe a bridge at night around trouble. And this is a big swim bait with a big hook in it. Well, now you're using a medium heavy to a heavy power rod. Why is that? Well, a couple of different reasons. One, the hook in that or the wire gauge in that is a pretty stout deal, and you're going to need a lot of power to drive that hook into the fish. Two, those are heavier lures. We're talking about lures that weigh upward to 1 ounce. And then again, you're dealing with a fish that can take you down into some heavy cover, snags around pilings or bridge fenders or underneath docks. And you're going to need some pulling power, some fish fighting ability. So all of that plays into the decision making on what power rod that you're going to use. All right, the last term we're going to explain is action. Action is one of those terms that we use to identify the flex of the rod, especially toward the tip of the rod and going down into the butt of the rod. It's the overall flex. Now, this is not only going to help you cast certain lures, but it's also going to help you fight the fish. That's why action is so important and a tricky thing between power and action when you're trying to balance these two out. So faster actions, like fast to extra fast, are going to create more sensitivity. Now, these are stiffer at the tip. They're more crisp, if you will. So they feel every little thing. So bite detection with fast and extra fast is absolutely what you want in certain situations, especially when you're bottom fishing or fishing semi-slack lines where it's going to require a quick hook set. Or let's just say a species like flounder, who likes to swim up to the lure, grab it, and they don't move around too much. And you feel the thump and you reel down, and you're going to have to be able to make a great hook set because they've got a really bony mouth. Well, that's where fast and extra fast come in handy. Now, mod fast, for me, is an excellent choice for those of us that like to throw plugs with treble hooks. Now, I'm a big Mirrolure and Paul Brown fan, and I love fishing for trout. So for me, the bend in a moderate fast rod is going to go deeper into the blank, be more even and smooth, so that when I reel in there and lean on that fish, I'm going to have a nice, easy bend. It's not going to tear a big hole in the face or the mouth of that fish. And it's not going to open any of those finer wire hooks up on those Paul Brown lures or those Mirrolures. So in that case, I would probably pick more of a medium to medium heavy power with a mod fast action. The action is how that rod flexes. It's important. Think about what I'm telling you, because when I give you this architecture of the rod, it's going to make perfect sense when I give you these scenario examples. All right, there are so many considerations that you can take into account for choosing a rod, whether you're at the retailer or you're in your garage and you're just picking something out to put in your skiff, like I'll be doing later today for tomorrow. But a lot of it has to come down to lure choice. I'd say that's one of the biggest factors or considerations that you're going to have. Why is that? Well, it really determines the power of the rod most of the time and the action. Are you throwing a lure that's heavy, or are you throwing a lure that's light? Are you throwing a lure that's kind of in between? Or if you're throwing one with treble hooks, are you throwing one with maybe a larger hook that has a heavier gauge wire? It all matters with lure choice. Are you throwing something that might be a suspending plug that might have a semi-slack type feel to it? So what rod are you going to pick for that versus a bottom contact bait where you're making bottom contact? You got to have a certain feel for that as well. So lure choice definitely weighs into my decision making. Now the next decision I'm going to make is this: cover. Cover is very important when choosing a rod. Like I said earlier, are you fishing docks? Are you fishing mangroves? Are you fishing a narrow creek that has lots of spartina and exposed oyster that might come across the creek, might have some laydowns in that creek? Or are you on almost like a bonefish type flat with sparse grass, just some soft marl bottom and sand holes? Nothing to get in the way. All that determines what you're going to choose. Then there is species, okay? We make a great example of the speckled trout because most of us that watch this channel are big speckled trout fans. I mean, I am, I don't hide that. But we also catch a lot of redfish. We do on occasion catch cobia and tarpon and triple tail and flounder and things like that. So, I mean, that species could determine what length rod you're throwing, what power rod you're throwing, and what action rod you're throwing. So those first three are very, very important. 4 is typically, what's more important to me, distance or accuracy? It's kind of a strategic approach. Do I need to throw to targets? It doesn't have to be the actual fish. I'm not talking about sight fishing. I'm talking about Can I see prop scars, or maybe I can see submerged pieces of rocks or timber or something like that I'm throwing to? Or is it one of those things where the fish are spread out, it's higher water, I'm just kind of just going through my fan cast deal here, just trying to cover as much water and trying to put the law of averages in my favor? That's going to make me determine at least the length and probably the action of the rod. For me, sometimes line type will play into my decision making. And you're like, oh, don't you just use braid? Well, of course I do, but sometimes I'll use like a micro braid versus a standard braid. I might want to use more of a standard braid if I'm throwing a bigger bait or something like that, where I wouldn't throw micro braid. If I'm throwing a lighter bait, I might throw micro braid. And believe it or not, I throw fluorocarbon, castable fluorocarbon sometimes, especially with moving baits. Works really well. I live in a clear water fishery. Works well for me. And that really makes me pick casting gear a lot. All right, what about fish fighting? Fish fighting. Now that will determine what you want to choose as well, because it's going to determine the power and probably the length of the rod. So if I know that we're tarpon fishing, I'm going to pick a certain rod. If I know that we might be targeting, pompano and some deeper water, I might pick a rod that has, a little bit more power than medium, but it's going to be extra fast so I can feel them on the pickup. So there are a lot of things to consider. And then there's hook setting. If you've got hard mouth fish, let's say you're targeting triple tail around crab pots or pilings, something like that, or again, I'll use the flounder as a perfect example. These are bony mouth fish where it's really hard to get a good hook set in. So you're probably going to use a much faster action, and you might go up one power than you normally would in flats fishing. So all of these typical decisions are made on the fly. Now here's one more. Sensitivity. Now this is very, very important for me in the dead of winter on cold days, because sensitivity for me when I'm working a Ned rig, I want an extra fast tip, one that's super crisp. I can make a cast, a good long cast, even with a 7-foot rod, even if it's medium light. But when I'm working it on that bottom, I can feel that head touching everything, and I can feel the pickup. And then I can come tight really quick with just reeling instead of having to make a big hook set. So sensitivity is one of those other ones, or considerations, I should say, that really play into my decision making when choosing rods. But let's break it down step by step, what I think are good rods for everyday types of inshore fishing that I know you're encountering and you use all the time, to give you kind of a rule of thumb, if you will, on what you might want to use. The first one would be topwater. Topwater for me, depending upon your physical stature, how you're fishing, whether you're in a kayak, if you're wade fishing, or if you're in a skiff, or maybe you're in a center console. But typically, a rod from 6'9" to 7'2" is ideal for topwater fishing, with 7 foot probably being the standard. You're probably, based off the size of the topwater, some of us throw medium-sized topwater, some of us throw large topwaters. So the power of the rod would probably be a medium to medium heavy. And then I'm going to say, because the casting distance with most topwaters is so far out there, you're going to need a very responsive tip, because you might get the strike 140, 150 feet away, and you're going to need to be able to come tight and strike them. So you're going to need a fast action rod. You don't want extra fast, and you don't want something like moderate fast. You need fast. Fast is the best. Now, what if you're throwing this? A 3 to 4 inch paddle tail. So many of us do that on like a 1/8 ounce or a 3/16 jig head. You do know or realize when you peg it on the plastic itself, now the lure weighs more than 1/8, more than 3/16. It probably weighs somewhere between 5/16 and 3/8, or maybe even a half at times. It depends on the type of plastic or Elastec that you're throwing on there. So now you've got a little bit bigger deal. What are you going to throw with that? You're going to throw a 7 foot to 7'3" length most of the time, depending upon how you're fishing. 7 foot to 7'3" rod length is ideal for that. Medium action on most jigs works. Now, I'm not talking about Texas rig. I'm just talking about an open jig. Unless you've got some super HD beefed up wire hook on there, most, I'm going to say typical jig heads, you're going to be able to get by with medium. And then you want fast. You definitely want fast. Single hook jigs usually require a faster action. So 7 foot to 7'3" medium fast for that. Now, what about this? A Mirrodine. That's the 17 MR or the 18 MR or even the 27 MR. It doesn't really matter. But that's a suspending hard bait that you're flashing and you're trying to get some action on. What's the ideal rod for that? Again, for me, I'm giving you my advice as a guide. 7 foot to 7'3" once again, because that's going to give you your greatest accuracy. Remember, we're throwing, space age equipment here these days. We're not talking 20 years ago. So you can get 130, 140 foot casts with a 7 foot to 7'3" rod. You don't really need it any farther than that. Those plugs typically fall into that 5/16 to 9/16 range. So, right there, quarter, a little better than a ½ ounce. So that's probably going to be a medium, once again, medium power. And then you're going to want a fast. You could go with a mod fast, but in most cases, you'd probably go with fast. But mod fast to fast works with that same group, so you're almost using the same rod that you would for a paddle tail. It's pretty close, okay? Now, some of you might say, well, why wouldn't I use a 7'6" rod? I could throw further. I've got no problem with that, and many of you own 7'6" rods. But one thing I'm going to tell you about a 7'6" rod real quick before we move on to the next scenario. If you're using it with longer leaders and light line, like I'm going to say like 8 and 10 pound limper braids, what do you notice that happens with your casting all day long? You get a lot of tip wraps because those longer rods kind of like vibrate when you cast them. You cast them, they go whoa, 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 and they wrap that tip. They wrap it a lot. It's aggravating. And at times it costs you casting distance instead of helping you unless you have the perfect smoothest cast. Everything's balanced. Think about it. That's why those shorter rods actually work out sometimes. All right, let's talk about this scenario. Ned rigs. Pretty much gave this away earlier. Ned rigs, again, I like 7 foot rods for Ned rigs. That's just me. Typically, I'm target fishing to holes or to actual fish because I use Ned rigs all year long. I'm usually using a power that's medium light to medium. Just depends. If I'm throwing a little heavier Ned rig, and there are some heavier Ned rigs out there, I'll go to medium. But 7 foot, you could go all the way to 7'3" if you want to. And then I would use probably an extra fast action. And you're like, well, why would I use such a fast action? Shouldn't I use something lighter because it's light, it's a lighter hook and everything like that? You just play the drag a lot smoother when you're fishing those. So I'm always using 6 and 8 pound line when I'm fishing Ned rigs most of the time, trying to make the signature the smallest it can be in the water so the fish don't notice it. So I usually have my drag set for like 1.5 pounds, 2 pounds max, and then it runs around. So I really don't want that light a tip. I'd rather have the sensitivity for fishing a Ned rig than have the slower action. All right, let me talk about this one next. Texas rig. Now, this is the one that gets a lot of you in trouble because you're going to try to get away with one rod for everything. And I even said, utility rods, like a 7 foot medium fast. But this is where this one bites you a little bit. When I Texas rig, let's just say I'm Texas rigging a 5-inch jerk shads. Now I use Z-Man Elastec, don't hide that at all. I'm a partner with them, and some people think that's a negative. I actually think it's positive. It means I'm a proven professional and I'm worth being paid to represent them. So I'm going to give you the benefit of my experience. And when I'm using those lures, I'll bury the point of the hook inside the bait, so it truly is Texas rigged. I don't let it pop out on top, okay? Because all that does is, after a hard cast, create a little gap there, and the weeds get in it all the time. You're constantly cleaning it off, or it's getting hung up. That doesn't happen. With ElaZtech, you can just bury the point in it. So let's just say I'm using a 5-inch jerk shad. And on that 5-inch jerk shad, I've got a weighted EWG hook, okay? So the overall weight of that whole rig is going to probably be somewhere between 3/8 and a half ounce, or maybe even a little bit better. It just depends on the weight of that belly weight. So for me, I'm going to probably want a 7'2" to a 7'4", okay, rod. That's what I want. One that's a little longer, because remember what I said about the hook setting ability? Longer rods give you a little bit, a little bit greater leverage on the hook set, where you can sweep and take more slack out. And remember, this thing is just walking like this, so there's lots of times when it's falling, and it's falling on semi-slack line. You're also going to want a medium heavy. You're already got a lure that's flirting with that half and a little bit over on total weight when you really think about it. So that medium heavy reduces the flex in that rod a little bit, and that will allow you to fight the fish, but it also allows you to get a better hook set. And then I do use a fast action rod, because I'm driving it through the ElaZtech, out of it into the fish's mouth, and to have maximum penetration, I'm going to want a fast tip. So I want that to be a faster action rod. So 7'2", 7'4", medium heavy, fast is perfect for Texas rigging, especially that size bait, that 5-inch size, which is really popular right now in the spring moving into summer. So talking about summer, we're going to probably start playing around, catching tarpon and snook and chasing cobia on the back of rays and having a lot more fun with these bigger species. So some of you are going to start throwing the swim baits, and the swim baits have become really popular, whether they're like the Mullotron with the wedge tail, or if they're a larger paddle tail. I know some of my guys are hooked on that mega bass, that mag draft, things like that. And you're throwing it around heavier cover, bridges and piers and seawalls, and it's not always out in the open. So what are you going to use for something like this? Well, this is where you pull out those longer rods, like 7'3" to 7'6" in length. Because again, because these are going to have beefier hooks, the weight of these baits could be anywhere from a half 5/8 all the way to 1+ ounce. So you're going to need a medium heavy to heavy power rod. You're going to want, I'm going to say 7'3" to 7'6" on length. Now here's the tricky part, really tricky. Depends on the species that you're fishing. Do you want a mod fast, or do you want a fast as far as the action? So if I'm throwing these lures on the beach for tarpon or snook in the swash channels, I'll go ahead and throw a mod fast. Why would I do that? Because the mod fast tip loads a little deeper in the blank. But both of these species have reputations for launching out of the water and violently shaking their heads or totally doing somersaults. And that allows me to be a little bit more sticky with the fish, and he can't come off. Can't come off. But let's just say I'm snook fishing around docks or on these swim baits. I'm skipping them under there and I'm reeling them back out. And I'm skipping them under there and reeling them back out. Then I want to fast, because at that point, I want to be able to get him out of that hazard as fast as remember, I told you, there's a couple of considerations, and cover is one of them. This one's one of my favorites, and that's skipping docks. I love to skip docks, and I love to skip mangroves as we move from spring to summer. It's something I'm good at. It's something I love to do. Now for me, I can accomplish this with a rod length that's anywhere between 6'10" and probably 7'3", with 7 and 7'2" being my sweet spot for picking rods for this. I like to use medium heavy to heavy power, Just depends on the scenario, what size fish I expect to catch. And again, I'm probably going to use a fast action rod for this style. I need a little flex in that tip, so I can't go extra fast, and I don't want so much tip I can't skip. Now, my favorite skipping lure of all time is a 4-inch unrigged Z-Man Mullitron, Texas rigged, with a tungsten bullet weight in the front of it. So this thing weighs like 5/8, maybe even 11/16 or so, right there before 3/4. And it's a little head weighted for me, so I can really skip it on a casting rod. So I can get it way under there in all these little places that I want to put it. And that bait is so dense and that wedge tail is together, so it's not floppy, so it doesn't like slow it down. It lets it skip. There is nothing better than throwing a 4-inch Mullitron that is rigged that way with that type of rod, and the response you get, well, it's incredible. Hey, if you enjoy what I'm teaching here on FlatsClass YouTube, you're really going to like FlatsClassUniversity.com. We have very structured course material over there to teach you everything about inshore fishing. I have weekly chalk talks where we do a breakdown every week that will set you up for the weekend. You get lure gifts every month and a mailer. You get a 20% discount at sodiumusa.com, where all the tackle I've talked about today you can buy right there. And why wouldn't you? It's easy. It's at your door in 48 hours. All right. I promised you I was going to share the rods that I use as my workhorse, daily driver, EDC, whatever term you want to use. And these are the two rods that I use most days. Now, they're not spinning rods. Spinning rods for me, I usually use for, unless it's some type of tarpon fishing or something like that, or natural bait fishing, which is very rare for me, like 1% of the time, is I relegate them to finesse fishing like the Neds, and I relegate them to maybe up to lighter medium type lures, okay, unweighted baits. But for me, most of my fishing is done with casting gear. I'm not saying that's the best way to do it. It's just the best way for me. So I want to give you the two rods that I would choose most days. The first one that I probably use the most is a 7'3" medium fast rod. It's a little longer than that 7-footer that I would recommend for a lot of spinning rod guys. But 7'3" for my size and the way I cast and everything I do, 7'3" medium does everything for me. It really does. It covers most of the lures that I want to throw between 1/4 and 5/8, which is when I pick out my 10 favorite lures, that's the rod I throw. I mean, I never not have that rod in my boat, like never. I can do everything with it. Are there better choices for doing certain things like smaller top waters? Or maybe, yes, there are. But that rod overall, whether I'm throwing spoons, I'm throwing mirrodines, I'm throwing most paddle tail style baits, it works great. When it comes to throwing a little bit bigger stuff or Texas rig fishing, then all I do is pick the next power up. That's it. I literally pick the Fitzgerald all-purpose 7'3" medium heavy fast. So I have the medium and I have the medium heavy. They're both the same length. They're both the same action. It's just the power changes. That's it. That's all I do. Those two rods pretty much do all the heavy lifting in my game, in my inshore game. I can use those two rods. And probably, like I'm fishing tomorrow with a friend, I'm only bringing those two rods. I'm not bringing anything else. That's all I really need. So I might throw an extra reel in the bag in case I want to change to a different type of line. That's it. That's all I'm going to do. Hey, if you enjoyed what we taught you here today, give us that thumbs up and smash that subscription button. I'd love to have you here in my virtual classroom each and every day, because we drop a new video damn near every day here. Until next time, Captain CA signing off.